The air in the sapphire room hummed with a different kind of electricity. It wasn't from the soft, hidden lights or the sleek modern art on the walls. It came from the man at the head of the long obsidian table. His name was Leo Vance, and the room seemed to bend around him, as if he were a planet and everyone else was just caught in his gravity. Leo was the kind of rich that changed the weather in a room. He wasn't old money with quiet manners. He was new money forged in the white-hot fire of tech startups and brutal takeovers. He liked winning. More than that, he liked proving he was the smartest, the most powerful person anywhere he sat. Tonight, he was closing a deal. Across from him was a man with careful eyes and a hesitant smile, a potential investor from a more traditional, cautious company. The dinner was almost over. Plates that had held food more like art were being cleared away by silent, efficient staff. The investor, trying to find common ground, gestured with his wine glass toward the young woman collecting the dessert dishes. "There's a discipline to it, isn't there?" The investor said. "The service here, it's like a performance. Everyone has a role, a part to play. No mistakes." Leo's eyes, sharp and blue like a winter sky, followed the gesture. He saw the waitress. She was young, probably in her early 20s. Her black uniform was neat, but showed the faintest signs of wear at the seams. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple, practical style. She worked with a quiet focus, her movements economical, her eyes on her task. There was a tiredness in her posture, a kind of heaviness that spoke of long hours. To Leo, she wasn't a person. She was part of the room's machinery. A component. The investor's comment sparked something in him. A performance. The idea amused Leo. This investor dealt in brick and mortar, in slow, steady growth. Leo dealt in disruption, in spectacle, in proving points. A performance, Leo echoed, his voice cutting through the low chatter at the table. It had a ring to it, like a bell. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. His gaze locked onto the waitress as she picked up the last empty plate from their table. "Excuse me," he said, not loudly, but with a force that demanded obedience. The young woman stopped. She turned, her expression perfectly professional, politely blank. "Yes, sir? Can I get you anything else?" Leo didn't answer her directly. Instead, he slowly raised his arm and pointed across the room. There, on a low spotlighted stage, sat the restaurant's grand piano. It was a beautiful, polished beast of an instrument, a centerpiece. A professional musician played there on weekends, filling the room with expensive background sound. Right now, it was dark and silent. "The piano," Leo said, his eyes glinting with a cruel kind of playfulness. "I hear the talent here is exceptional." Even among the serving staff, a few of his own executives, sensing the shift in their boss's mood, offered low, sycophantic chuckles. The investor looked uncertain, unsure where this was going. The waitress's professional mask didn't slip, but Leo saw a flicker in her eyes. Confusion, then a hint of apprehension. "I'm sorry, sir," she said. "Play for us," Leo stated. It wasn't a request. It was a command, smooth and heavy as lead. "Entertain our guest? Let's see this famous discipline for ourselves." The room at their table fell completely silent. The clink of cutlery from other booths seemed suddenly very far away. The waitress, still holding her tray, became the absolute center of attention. "Oh, I couldn't, sir," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm on duty, and the piano is for scheduled performers." She offered a small, tight smile, trying to diffuse the situation with protocol. Leo's smile didn't waver. He enjoyed this. The resistance, the little dance of power. He was applying pressure, and he wanted to see how she would bend. "Nonsense," he said, his tone turning cooler, harder. The playful glint was gone, replaced by the steel he used in boardrooms. The stage is right there. The piano is just sitting idle. Consider it a special request. A challenge to the restaurant's reputation for excellence. He paused, letting the unspoken threat hang in the air. A bad word from Leo Vance could mean a lot to a place like this. Or perhaps, he added, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more frightening, a test of your own honesty. Do you really have the talent this place claims? Or are you all just very good at pretending? The cruelty of the question landed like a physical blow. He was cornering her, making it about her integrity, about the restaurant's honor. Refusing now would look like she was hiding, like she was a fraud. The investor looked deeply uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. He'd made a casual observation, and now it had turned into this public spectacle. The young woman stood very still. Leo watched her closely. He saw the flush of humiliation rise on her neck. He saw her knuckles whiten where she gripped the tray. He saw the brief, desperate glance she shot toward the restaurant's manager, who was hovering nervously by the kitchen door, caught between a furious billionaire and an employee. The manager gave a tiny, almost imperceptible, helpless nod. For a long moment, she said nothing. The air was thick with tension. Leo knew he had won. This was the moment of submission he was waiting for. She would stammer an apology, maybe play a clumsy, childish tune, and he would have his little victory. He would have proven that everything, even art, could be commandeered by his will and his money. It would be a story to laugh about later. Finally, she moved. Not with a huff or a look of anger, but with a slow, deliberate grace that was surprising. She walked over to a side station and carefully, precisely, set down her heavy tray. She smoothed the front of her uniform, a small, unconscious gesture. Then, without looking at Leo again, she turned and walked toward the stage. Her steps were not the hurried, nervous clicks of someone forced into a corner. They were slow, measured, almost resigned. The spotlight above the piano was off, leaving it in a pool of shadow. Every eye in the sapphire room followed her. Conversations at other tables had died out. This was better than the scheduled music. This was real-life drama. She stepped onto the low stage. She stood beside the piano for a second, just looking at it. To Leo, it seemed like she was looking at a ghost. Then she pulled out the bench and sat down. She didn't immediately play. She simply placed her hands in her lap and bowed her head for a moment, as if gathering herself, or perhaps saying goodbye to something. Leo leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his chin resting on his folded hands. The smirk was back. This was the best part, the pause before the failure. He glanced at the investor, raising an eyebrow as if to say, "Watch this dot." The waitress raised her hands. In the dim light, they looked pale against the dark wood of the piano. She didn't position them for chopsticks or twinkle, twinkle. Her fingers curved over the keys with a natural, practiced authority that made Leo's smirk falter for a second. It was the posture of a musician, a real one. She didn't look at the keys. She closed her eyes. A deep, quiet breath lifted her shoulders and then let them fall. And then she began to play. The first sound wasn't a note. It was a whisper, a soft, resonant brush of a chord that seemed to vibrate in the stillness of the room. Then another, deeper, richer. It wasn't a song anyone at the table recognized. It wasn't cheerful or simple. It was complex, a weaving together of minor keys that spoke of rain on empty streets and memories that hurt to touch. It was beautiful, but it was an aching, lonely kind of beauty. Leo Vance's smirk vanished completely. His businesslike, folded hands posture went rigid. He knew music. He funded entire symphony seasons. He sat on gala boards. This was not what he had ordered. This was not a performance. This was a confession in sound. The melody unfolded, telling a story without words. It had passages of fierce, stormy passion that made the investor sit bolt upright, his financial worries forgotten. It fell into sections of such delicate, heartbreaking softness that a woman at a nearby table quietly put her hand over her heart. The waitress was no longer a waitress on a stage. She was a channel for something else entirely. Her body moved with the music, not with dramatic flourishes, but with the natural flow of someone who was not just playing the notes, but feeling them, living inside them. Leo could only stare. The cruel joke was gone. The point he wanted to prove was vaporized. All that was left was the sound, this incredible, devastating sound pouring from the instrument he had demanded she play as a punishment. He had wanted to mock her, to reduce her to a simple source of amusement. Instead, she had taken his command and transformed it into something that made him, Leo Vance, feel small. He listened, and for the first time in a very long time, he was not in control. He was just another person in the dark, being shown a piece of someone's soul he had no right to see. The first notes didn't just fill the silence. They tore it down and built a new world in its place. Leo Vance sat frozen, his chin still resting on his hands, but the smug, calculating light had completely vanished from his eyes. It was replaced by a kind of stunned blindness. The melody that flowed from the piano was not something you hummed. It was something you felt in your bones. It started low, a deep, rumbling storm of sound from the left hand, like thunder rolling over distant hills. Over the top of it, the right hand picked out a clear, pure line of notes. They were high and lonely, like a single bird trying to fly against that gathering storm. The contrast was breathtaking. This was no simple tune. It was a conversation, an argument, a story of struggle. Leo knew music. He had to. It was part of the world he owned. He sponsored concert halls. His name was on plaques in symphony orchestra lobbies. He sat through performances, appreciating them like fine wine, noting the technical skill, the cost, the prestige. But this was different. This wasn't being played at him from a stage 100 feet away. This was happening 10 feet from his table, and it felt like it was being played inside him. The sound was so direct, so personal. It bypassed his brain and went straight to a place he rarely visited. The young woman at the piano was gone. The tired waitress in the slightly frayed uniform had disappeared. In her place was someone completely absorbed, completely in command. Her eyes were closed, her face tilted slightly toward the ceiling of the dark stage. Her hands moved over the keys, not with the stiff, hesitant touch of an amateur, but with a fluid, powerful grace. When the music demanded force, her whole body leaned into it, her shoulders driving down. When it called for a whisper of sound, her fingers barely caressed the ivory, pulling out notes so soft, the room had to stop breathing to hear them. He had ordered a clown. He had gotten a composer. Across the table, the potential investor was a changed man. All his business caution, his nervous smiles, were gone. His mouth was slightly open. He was leaning so far forward, he was almost out of his chair. He wasn't watching a business deal anymore. He was witnessing a miracle. One of Leo's own executives, a sharp-faced woman who usually had a phone glued to her hand, had let her device drop onto the tablecloth, forgotten. She was just staring, her expression unreadable. The piece moved. The stormy part gave way to a section of profound, aching sadness. The notes were slower now, spaced apart like careful footsteps in an empty house. Each chord hung in the air, beautiful and full of pain, before fading away. It was the sound of memory, the sound of loss. Leo, against his own will, felt a tightness in his chest. He thought of his own first company, a tiny garage operation with a friend who had believed in him. He hadn't thought of that friend, of that pure, unfiltered excitement in over a decade. The memory was a ghost, and this music was giving it shape. Then, as quickly as the sadness came, it transformed. The music began to climb. It wasn't a happy climb, not a cheerful skipping up the scales. It was a determined one, a gritty, stubborn ascent. The left hand started a relentless, pulsing rhythm, like a heartbeat finding its strength again. The right hand built a melody over it that was full of cracks and light-broken but persevering. It was musical sunlight breaking through heavy clouds, not warming everything at once, but in sharp, brilliant beams. The waitress, the pianist, was now swaying gently with this new rhythm. A strand of her dark hair had come loose from its practical tie and fell across her forehead. She didn't brush it away. Sweat glistened on her temple under the dim light. This was not easy. This was a physical and emotional marathon. She was pouring everything she had into the keys, and it was costing her. Leo's mind, always analyzing, always racing 10 steps ahead, finally kicked back into gear, but in a totally new direction. This wasn't random. This level of skill, this depth of feeling, this was not someone who had taken piano lessons as a kid. This was a professional, a world-class one. How was she here? Why was she clearing his dessert plate? A cold, sick feeling started to pool in his stomach. It wasn't nausea. It was shame. The sharp, unfamiliar taste of it was metallic in his mouth. His cruel little game, his power play to impress the investor, now felt cheap and ugly. He had tried to force a bird to sing for his amusement, only to discover it was an eagle, and he had foolishly clipped its wings without even knowing. He needed information. Now, without taking his eyes off the pianist, he made a small, sharp gesture with his left hand. Low by his side, his personal assistant, a young man who sat silently at the far end of the table, immediately understood. The assistant pulled out his phone, his fingers flying over the screen. He was not texting for fun. He was on a mission. Leo had to know who this was. He had to understand the magnitude of his mistake. On stage, the music was reaching its peak. The two hands of the piano were now in a furious, beautiful agreement. The storm and the bird, the memory and the determination, they weren't fighting anymore. They were flying together. The sound was huge. It filled every corner of the lavish sapphire room, vibrating in the water glasses, ringing in the light fixtures. It was triumphant, but it was a hard-won triumph. A victory that remembered the cost of the battle dot, and then it began to ease. The climb was over. The melody drifted back down, not into sadness, but into something quieter. Acceptance, maybe. Or peace. The notes became simple again, clean, echoing the opening theme, but with a new softness, like a wound that has finally closed into a scar. The final few chords were played so gently, they seemed to disappear into the air before they even finished sounding. Her hands lifted from the keys and came to rest, trembling slightly, back in her lap. The last vibration from the piano strings faded into absolute, perfect silence. For a long, long moment, nothing happened. No one moved. No one clapped. The spell was too complete. The investor had tears openly glistening in his eyes. The executive with the forgotten phone let out a breath. She seemed to have been holding for 5 minutes. The young woman on the stage opened her eyes. She looked down at her own hands, as if surprised to find them there. The moment of transcendence was over. The reality of the room, the eyes, the uniform, came flooding back into her posture. She seemed to shrink a little, the powerful artist receding, leaving the tired waitress in her place once more. She stood up from the piano bench. She didn't look at Leo. She didn't look at anyone. She simply turned, stepped off the low stage, and began to walk back across the restaurant floor. Her steps were the same quiet, measured steps she had used before, but they seemed heavier now. Drained, the movement broke the spell. A man at a nearby table, a diner who had nothing to do with Leo's party, started to clap. It was a single, slow, respectful clap. Then his wife joined in. Then another table. Within seconds, the entire Sapphire Room erupted into genuine, thunderous applause. It wasn't the polite clapping for a finished dinner service. It was a roaring, standing ovation. People were getting to their feet. She kept walking. She acknowledged the applause with only the slightest, most painful-looking smile, a quick nod of her head that was more a wish to disappear than a bow. Her destination was clear, the tray she had left behind. Her real work dot as she passed Leo's table. The investor leapt to his feet, still clapping, his face full of awe. Bravo, my God, that was magnificent. He stammered. She gave him the same small, tight smile and kept walking. Leo was still sitting. The applause washed over him, but he felt detached from it, locked in a bubble of his own shocking thoughts. His assistant chose that moment to lean in close. He held his phone so only Leo could see the screen. On it was a photo, clearly from a local news article years ago. A younger, brighter-eyed version of the waitress stood next to a grand piano, holding a massive trophy. The headline was small but clear. Local prodigy claims national gold. The assistant whispered, his voice barely audible under the applause. Found her. She won the big national competition. A star. Then, family crisis. Medical debts. She dropped out of the conservatory. Works 2 jobs. He scrolled. The piece she just played. It's hers. An original composition. People online call it the Lost Etude. They've been looking for the full version for years. Leo didn't look at the phone. He looked at her. She had reached her tray. She picked it up, holding it in front of her like a shield. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and turned around. She was going back to work. Her eyes, avoiding his all this time, finally met his dot in them. He saw no anger, no pride, no demand for an apology. He just saw exhaustion and a deep, resilient dignity that made his own wealth and power feel like a childish costume. She walked back to his table. The applause was finally dying down. She stopped, her professional mask perfectly back in place. "I apologize for the interruption, sir," she said, her voice flat and calm. "Will there be anything else? The dessert specials are on the menu." The words hung in the air, sharp and simple. Will there be anything else? They weren't just a question about dessert. They were a wall, a dismissal. She had built it with the music, and now she was finishing it with this quiet, professional sentence. Leo Vance opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His brain, a machine that always had a retort, a deal point, a commanding phrase, was completely empty. He just stared at her. The investor, still standing, was beaming, lost in the afterglow of the music. Incredible. Simply incredible. "Young lady, you have a gift." He gushed. She gave the investor a slight, polite nod. "Thank you, sir." But her eyes flicked back to Leo, waiting for his answer. Her tray was held tightly against her chest. Finally, Leo managed to speak. His voice came out rougher than he intended. That was not what I expected." A ghost of something, not a smile, but an understanding passed over her face. "No, sir," she said softly. "I imagine it wasn't." There was no sarcasm in it. It was just a fact. She had known exactly what he expected. She had known the joke. And she had chosen, with 5 minutes of devastating sound, to tell him the punchline was on him. She waited another second. When he said nothing more, she gave another small nod. "The kitchen will be closing soon. Please let me know if you decide on dessert." Then she turned and walked away, moving toward another table that was signaling for their check. The spell was officially broken. The show was over. The help was back to work. The noise in the room slowly returned to normal, but it was a different normal. The clatter of plates and the murmur of conversation were now layered with excited whispers. People were glancing at the piano, and at the waitress, and at the powerful-looking man who had started it all. Leo could feel their eyes on him. They weren't looking at a billionaire anymore. They were looking at the fool who had tried to make a concert pianist dance for his dinner. He sat back in his chair, the expensive leather creaking. The investor finally sat down too, shaking his head in wonder. Leo, I have to say, that was the most remarkable business dinner entertainment I've ever witnessed. You really know how to provide an experience. Leo forced a tight smile. It felt like a crack in his face. Only the best for our partners, he muttered, the words tasting like ash. He couldn't focus. The melody was still echoing in the chambers of his mind, mixing with the assistant's whispered facts. Asterisk prodigy. Medical debt. Lost etude. Asterisk he needed air. He needed to think. If you'll excuse me for a moment, he said, standing abruptly. He didn't wait for a reply. He walked not toward the restrooms, but toward the restaurant's main entrance, pushing through the heavy doors into the cool, damp night of the city. Outside, the traffic hummed, and the neon lights painted the wet sidewalk in streaks of color. He took a deep breath, but the city air didn't clear his head. All he could see was her face as she played. The complete absorption. The pain and the beauty all mixed together. And then her face as she asked about dessert. The blank, professional mask that was somehow a deeper insult than any glare of hatred could have been. His assistant followed him out, a silent shadow. The young man knew better than to speak first. Tell me everything, Leo said, his voice low, his eyes on the passing cars. Now, all of it. The assistant didn't need notes. He had absorbed the information completely. Her name is Elena. She's 23. She started playing at 4. Scholarships all through school. She won the National Goldstone Prize for pianists at 17. It's a very big deal. Guaranteed entry to any music school in the world. Leo listened, his jaw tight. A prodigy. A real one. Not just a talented kid. A potential legend. She took a full scholarship at the conservatory. Top of her class first year. Then second year, her father got sick. A long illness. No insurance. Her mother had to stop working to care for him. The assistant paused, delivering the next part carefully. The medical bills were catastrophic for a normal family. They lost everything. The house was mortgaged. She left the conservatory and came home. The facts were clinical, but they painted a brutal picture. Leo understood numbers. He understood catastrophic loss. He had caused a few himself in boardrooms. But this was different. This wasn't about market share. This was about a family and a future dissolving. She works here 5 nights a week, the assistant continued. Days she works at a copy and print place near the hospital. She pays the rent on a small apartment for her parents and handles the remaining medical payments. The debt is significant. It will take her years. Leo finally turned to look at him. The music. The piece she played. The assistant nodded. That's the other thing. She composed it. It's called Solitude in a Minor. At least that's what the forums call it. She never officially published it. After she left school, a cell phone recording of her practicing, a section of it was leaked online by a classmate. It went semi-viral in classical music circles. People have been trying to find the full piece, or the composer, for a long time. They call it a masterpiece of modern solo piano. Haunting. That's the word everyone uses. Haunting. Haunting. Yes, that was the word. It had haunted the room. It was haunting him now. Leo felt that unfamiliar feeling in his gut again, churning and hot. It was shame, but it was morphing into something else. A fierce, sudden anger. Not at her. At the situation. At the brutal, stupid randomness of it. A sickness shouldn't be able to erase a sound like that from the world. A bill collector shouldn't have the power to silence those hands. He was a man who fixed broken systems. He bought failing companies and made them turn a profit. He saw inefficiency and destroyed it. This was the most glaring inefficiency he had ever witnessed, a world-class talent being wasted on clearing plates and making photocopies. But another, quieter thought followed. He was also the man who, minutes ago, had been the biggest threat in her world. He had been the arrogant rich man making her night worse. He was part of the problem. He looked through the glass door, back into the warm glow of the restaurant. He could see her moving between tables, her tray balanced, her posture perfect and tired. She was a ghost in her own life, serving food to people who had no idea who she was. "What's her last name?" Leo asked quietly. The assistant told him. Leo nodded slowly. A plan began to form in his mind. Not a pleasant plan, not a kind one. It was a business plan. It was the only language he truly understood. He could fix this. Not out of kindness. Out of a need to correct a mistake, to rebalance a scale he himself had tipped into cruelty. And if he was honest with himself, out of a selfish desire to hear that music again, on his terms. To own a piece of that beauty, since he couldn't create it himself. "Get the car," he said to his assistant. "We're leaving. And tomorrow, first thing, I want you to get me 2 things. The complete, current total of all her family's outstanding medical and personal debt. Every last cent. And I want the contact information for the head of the conservatory she left." The assistant's eyes widened just a fraction, but he simply said, "Yes, sir." Leo took one last look inside. She was picking up a credit card slip from a table, her head bowed. He turned and walked toward the sleek black car that had just pulled up to the curb. Back inside, the dinner party was winding down. The investor was ebullient, talking about the music, about passion, about the unexpected beauty in the world. Leo's executive smiled and agreed, paying the exorbitant bill without a blink. Elena cleared their table last. The glasses, the coffee cups, the crumpled linen napkins. She avoided the empty space where Leo had sat. As she stacked the final dish, the investor touched her arm gently. She flinched just a little. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. That was a gift. She met his eyes and gave him the first genuine, if weary, smile of the evening. "Thank you for listening," she said. It was what a musician said to an audience. Not what a waitress said to a customer. She carried the heavy load of dishes back toward the kitchen. The manager intercepted her at the door. He was a nervous man, and he looked relieved the night was almost over. Elena, that was. Well, it was something. Mr. Vance's assistant settled everything. The tip? It's very large. He handed her the credit card receipt. She looked at the total. The tip was more than she made in 2 weeks. It felt like a bandage on a bullet wound. Quietly, almost to herself, she said, "Payment for the performance." The manager didn't hear her, or pretended not to. Just, "Maybe next time, if a guest asks you to play, maybe just politely say no, okay?" It creates a scene. She looked at him, and he shrunk a little under her gaze. She didn't say anything. She just took the receipt, folded it, and put it in her pocket. The money would pay a bill. That's all that mattered. The music was over. The real world, with its real weights, was waiting. She pushed through the kitchen doors into the steam and the noise, ready to finish her shift, her hands still faintly trembling from the chords she had buried in the grand piano. The next day felt like two different worlds had collided and left a strange, quiet dust in the air. For the young woman, Elena, the morning was the same as any other. The alarm buzzed in the dark, small apartment she shared with her parents. The air smelled faintly of medicine and old books. She moved quietly, making tea, listening to the soft, raspy sound of her father's breathing from the next room. The memory of the night before felt distant and unreal, like a vivid dream that fades in the sunlight. Her hands, which had flown across the piano keys, now packed a lunch bag and sorted pills into a weekly container. She went to her day job at the copy and print shop. The familiar hum of the machines, the smell of toner, the routine of laminating posters and binding reports, it grounded her. Here, she was no one special. She was the quiet girl who knew how to fix paper jams and could work the expensive color printer. A customer came in, annoyed about a price. She handled it with calm patience, the same patience she used when her mother called, worried about a bill. The grand piano in the fancy restaurant seemed a million miles away. But in another part of the city, in a sleek office tower that pierced the clouds, Leo Vance was turning her life into a spreadsheet. His assistant had been efficient. By 10 a.m., a file sat on Leo's desk. It was not a story. It was data. The total debt from the medical crisis was a single, stark number. It was a large number, but to Leo, it was a manageable one. The kind of number he could move between accounts before his morning coffee got cold. Next to it were contacts. The head of the conservatory, the head of the city symphony, her former music professor. Leo didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man correcting a critical error in a financial model. His shame from the night before had hardened into a cold, clear objective. He could not erase his own behavior, but he could change the outcome. He would buy out the problem. He would reassign the asset, in this case, her talent, to its proper place. He made the calls himself. He was brief, direct, and used the weight of his name and his money like a tool. To the conservatory head, he said he was establishing a new, full-ride grant for students facing extraordinary hardship. The first recipient, he insisted, must be a former student named Elena. All debts to the institution were to be cleared. To the symphony director, a man Leo had funded for years, he proposed a commission, a new piano piece to premiere at their season opener. He gave the director the name of the composer and told him to listen to a poor-quality recording online called Solitude in a Minor. Find her, Leo said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Offer her the commission. A standard artist's fee, plus a bonus. I will cover it anonymously. This was how he operated. He was rerouting the trajectory of a life with the same focus he would use to acquire a struggling company. He told himself it was restitution. But deep down, a part of him wanted to own a piece of that beautiful, painful music. If he couldn't create it, he would be the reason it existed in the world. That evening, Elena returned to the restaurant for her shift. The manager gave her an odd look, but said nothing. The other waitstaff had heard about the piano incident, and they glanced at her with a new curiosity, but they were too busy to ask questions. She tied her apron, feeling the crumpled credit card receipt with the large tip still in her pocket. She wondered if the rich man would come back. Part of her hoped he wouldn't. Part of her was braced for another cruel game. He did come back, but not in the way she expected, that it was late, near the end of the dinner service. She was refilling water glasses at a table by the window when she felt a presence. She looked up, and there he was. Leo Vance stood alone, without his entourage. He wasn't wearing a suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled up. He looked out of place and strangely purposeful. "Can we talk?" he asked. His voice was not commanding this time. It was flat. Somewhere. Not here. Her first instinct was to say no, to tell him she was working. But the look in his eyes wasn't mocking. It was intense, like a scientist about to present findings. She nodded slowly to the manager, who waved a nervous hand in permission. She led Leo not to a table, but to a small, quiet alcove near the kitchen doors, a place where staff took quick breaks. The sounds of clattering pans were a dull echo. She didn't sit. She stood with her arms crossed, waiting. Leo didn't mince words. He never did. I looked into your situation. The debt. The conservatory. He saw her face tighten, a flash of anger and humiliation in her eyes. He held up a hand. Not to pry, to quantify. He laid it out, not as a gift, but as a proposal. He spoke about the grant he had established at the conservatory. He told her the financial hold on her account was gone, that a place was waiting for her if she wanted it next semester. He mentioned the symphony commission. He quoted the artist's fee. It was more money than her family had seen in years. Elena listened in stunned silence. Her heart was pounding. It was everything she had let herself stop dreaming about. A path back. A way out of the crushing weight. For a second, a wild, impossible hope bloomed in her chest. Then she looked at him. Really looked at him. She saw a man used to buying solutions. She saw the same person who had forced her to play to make a point, now forcing a salvation to make another point to himself. This was his way of balancing the books, that the hope curdled into something else. A deep, weary pride. Why? She asked, her voice quiet but clear over the kitchen noise. Why would you do that? Leo seemed prepared for the question. Because it's an inefficient use of resources. Your talent here is a waste. The world should hear that piece you played, properly. And you get to be the one who made it happen, she said. It wasn't a question. He met her gaze. Yes, there it was. The truth. It wasn't kindness. It was a transaction. He was buying her out of her misery and purchasing a piece of cultural prestige in return. He was investing in a human being. She looked down at her hands, still faintly smelling of dish soap from the lunch shift. These hands had played his humiliation and her own heartbreak last night. Now he was offering to put them on a concert stage. All she had to do was say yes to the man who had treated her like a toy. She thought of her father's face. She thought of her mother's constant, quiet worry. She thought of the stack of envelopes with final notice stamped on them. This offer could wipe all that away. It was a lifeline thrown from the very ship that had run her over. She took a deep, shaky breath. The grant, she said. If it's real, it should be for anyone who needs it. Not just me. You should make it a real thing. Leo nodded, a quick, businesslike dip of his head. It will be. And the symphony piece, she continued, her voice growing stronger. I would own the music. Completely. You get no rights to it. The commission fee is for the performance only. A flicker of something like respect crossed Leo's face. She was negotiating. She was treating this like the business deal it was. Agreed, he said. And the debt, she said, her throat tight. The medical debt. You would pay it off? I would acquire it, he corrected, using his own language. And then I would cancel it. It would be gone. Silence hung between them. The smell of garlic and searing steak wafted from the kitchen. The sounds of the restaurant laughter, clinking glass felt like they were from another planet. Elena's mind raced. This was salvation. But it was salvation with his name on it. It would always be the thing the rich man gave her after he mocked her. Could she live with that? Could her parents live without it? She thought of the music, of the need to play it, to finish it, to have it heard not by a dining room of wealthy people, but by an audience that came to listen. That need was bigger than her pride, bigger than her anger at him. She looked him in the eye. I will accept the symphony commission. I will use that money to pay down the debt myself. Not all of it, but a lot of it. You, you can clear the rest. As your part. She was carving out her own terms. She would not be a charity case. She would be a working artist buying back her family's freedom. And the conservatory? He asked. I'll go back, she said. When the piece is done, not as your special case, as a student who earned a grant. Leo studied her. He had offered a kingdom, and she was accepting a key on the condition she built her own door. She had more spine than most CEOs he knew. He gave one sharp nod. All right, the terms are acceptable. He reached into his pocket, took out a simple business card, and wrote a number on the back. This is my direct line, not my assistant. Tell the symphony director to contact this number for funding. Tell your parents' hospital to send the invoices to my office at this address. He handed her the card. It felt heavy in her hand. He turned to leave, then paused. He didn't look at her. He looked at the floor. The music you played last night, he said, his voice uncharacteristically rough. It shouldn't have happened like that. I was wrong. And then he was gone, walking back through the dining room and out into the night. Helena stood in the alcove, holding the card. She didn't feel joy. She didn't feel relief. She felt a tremendous, terrifying weight lift, and a new, different weight settle in its place. The weight of a second chance. The weight of a promise she had just made to herself, and to the music that had been sleeping inside her. She slipped the card into her apron pocket, next to the credit card receipt. Then she smoothed her uniform, pushed her shoulders back, and walked out to clear her next table. The work wasn't over yet. But for the first time, the city's grand concert hall was a universe away from the quiet alcove of a restaurant kitchen. Tonight, it was full, a sea of expectant faces and the soft rustle of expensive programs. The air smelled of perfume, old wood, and a faint trace of rosin from the orchestra's earlier warm dash-up dot in a box seat near the front. Leo Vance sat alone. He wore a tuxedo, but he felt oddly detached from the glittering crowd. He hadn't wanted to sit with anyone. This wasn't a social event for him. It was the closing of a ledger. For months, his office had quietly handled the transfer and cancellation of a specific set of medical debts. The grant at the conservatory was now a real endowed fund, already helping 2 other students. He had kept his side of the bargain, with the cold efficiency of a man executing a contract. But this, the premier, was her side. He was here to witness the delivery of the asset. Backstage was a different kind of chaos, a focused, whispered energy. Elena stood in the soloist's holding room, wearing a simple, dark blue gown. It wasn't flashy. It felt like her. Her hands were steady, which surprised her. The frantic nerves she'd expected were gone, replaced by a deep, humming calm. She looked at herself in the mirror. The tiredness around her eyes was still there, but it was softer now. Behind it was a new light, a quiet fire that had been rekindled. The piece she would play was no longer called Solitude in a Minor. It had a new name, one she had chosen carefully. It was written on the program. Asterisk, asterisk, resonance, etude for piano and orchestra. Asterisk, asterisk, it was still her music, the heart of that piece from the restaurant, but it had grown. It had been orchestrated, expanded, given new colors and depths with the help of the symphony's kind, brilliant conductor. It was no longer just a cry of pain. It was a story of echoes, of how a single, lonely sound could ripple out and change everything around it. The stage manager appeared at her door. 5 minutes, Miss Elena. She nodded, taking a final, deep breath. She thought not of the crowd, but of her parents. They were out there, in the best seats the box office could provide, holding hands tightly. Her father was frail, but he was here. He was seeing this. That was the real victory. Not the applause, But his presence, the conductor walked onto the stage first, to polite, warm applause. Then he gestured toward the wings. Elena walked out. The applause grew, standard and welcoming for a featured artist. She didn't smile a big, showy smile. She gave a small, respectful bow to the conductor, to the orchestra, and then to the audience. Her eyes scanned the blur of faces for a second, finding the box where she knew he would be. She couldn't see his expression from here, and she was glad. This was not for him. She sat at the magnificent concert grand piano, adjusting the bench. The hall fell into a hush so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. She placed her hands on the keys, cool and familiar. She closed her eyes, and for a split second, she was back on the dark stage at the restaurant. The smell of steak and wine in the air, the feeling of humiliation hot in her chest. She let the memory come, and then she let it go. That was the first note. This was the symphony. Her hands came down. The piece began almost exactly as it had that night, a low, rumbling storm in the left hand, a single, clear, lonely line in the right. But now, as the piano established the theme, a single viola echoed it from the string section. Then an oboe. The lonely voice was no longer alone. It was being heard, answered. The orchestra didn't overpower the piano. It wrapped around it, conversed with it, lifted it. Leo listened, his body perfectly still. He had heard the raw, angry heart of this music before. But this was different. This was the heart, fully alive, beating in a body of sound. He could still feel the shame of that first night, but now it was mixed with something else all. He had been the catalyst for this, but he was not the creator. He was just a witness. The music swelled, the storm passages now a furious, beautiful tempest from the entire brass and percussion sections, the piano driving through it like a ship. The quiet, sad sections were even more profound, with gentle harp glissandos and soft, sighing cellos underneath. He found he wasn't analyzing it. He was just feeling it. He thought of the garage where he started. He thought of the friend he'd left behind. He thought of the countless human stories he'd steamrolled on his way up. For the first time, he wondered about the music that had been silenced in all those other lives. The efficiency expert in him was silent. Only the human being was left, and he felt very, very small. On stage, Elena was lost in the world she had built. Her hands flew, her body moved with the music's demands. This was not a performance for a mocking billionaire. This was a conversation with every person who had ever struggled, who had ever been overlooked, who had ever held a beautiful dream inside them while doing something ordinary to survive. She poured every bit of the last hard year into it, the fear at the hospital, the smell of the copy shop, the weight of the tray, the feel of the restaurant's piano keys under her fingers that night, and the fragile, terrifying hope that had begun in a kitchen alcove. The final movement began, not with a bang, but with a quiet, insistent rhythm in the piano. It was the sound of determination, of a heart that had been broken, but decided to keep beating anyway. One by one, the instruments of the orchestra joined this rhythm, building a powerful, soaring tapestry of sound. It was triumphant, but it was a human triumph. It was sweaty and real, and had scars. It climbed and climbed until it reached a peak of such blazing, beautiful noise that it seemed to shake the very dust from the rafters. And then, as before, it eased. The orchestra faded away, instrument by instrument, leaving the piano alone once more. The melody returned to a simple, clean version of the first theme. But it was changed. It was no longer lonely. It was at peace. It was home. The final notes were so quiet, they were almost a thought, a memory of a sound, before her hands lifted and the hall was plunged into silence. For a long moment, nothing. Then the applause erupted. It wasn't polite. It was a roar. It was a physical wave of sound that hit the stage. People were on their feet, shouting, their faces alive with emotion. The orchestra members were smiling, tapping their stands with their bows in respect. The conductor beamed at her, then turned to the audience, gesturing wildly toward where Elena stood. The calm was still there, but now joy was breaking through, bright and overwhelming. She bowed deeply, her eyes filling with tears she didn't try to hide. She looked toward her parents' box and saw her mother weeping, her father nodding slowly, his own cheeks wet. She bowed again, and then she did something unexpected. She walked over to the conductor, shook his hand, and then gestured to the orchestra, inviting them to share the standing ovation. This was not her triumph alone. It was theirs. In his box, Leo Vance finally stood. He was clapping, but slowly, almost mechanically. He was watching her. He saw the grace, the humility, the sheer power of her talent meeting its moment. He saw that she had taken his transaction and turned it into something human, something far beyond any contract. The applause began to die down. People started gathering their things. Leo remained standing, looking at the now empty piano bench. On his seat, he found his program. He hadn't looked at it closely before. He flipped to the notes about the new composition. There was a biography of the composer, a description of the music. And at the bottom, in italics, was the dedication. It read, asterisk, asterisk, for the unexpected listeners. You know who you are. Asterisk, asterisk, he stared at the words. A strange, tight feeling constricted his throat. It wasn't shame anymore. It wasn't pride. It was something like gratitude, but sharper. It was the understanding that he had been given a gift far greater than any he had given. He had been allowed to hear the truth. And in doing so, he had been changed. He looked up one last time. She was gone from the stage. The crowd was flowing out, buzzing with excitement. The show was over. Leo Vance, the billionaire, placed the program carefully in his jacket pocket. He turned and walked out of the box, not with the swagger of a man who owned the room, but with the quiet step of a man who had finally learned how to listen. He didn't know what he would do tomorrow, but for the first time in a long time, he knew the sound of something real, and he knew he wanted to hear more of it.